This is slavery outside the Constitution. Guys, when you've been doing this a long time, in your mind's eye, you can see the question, okay? And I can see questions like, okay, how did the United States government deal with the growing problem of the spread of slavery, okay? And when you talk about that, you got to talk about this, okay? So we're going to look at the compromises that came into play once it became apparent that the spread of slavery was going to be a divisive issue. Everybody knew it, but it kind of came to the fore in 1820 with that. This is Thomas Jefferson's Fire Bell in the Night. Things about the Missouri Compromise that you probably need to know, okay? Every one of these compromises involving slavery, they involve a territorial acquisition, okay? For example, this involved the entire Louisiana Purchase. When we get to the Compromise of 1850, that is the Mexican Cession, okay? So this is the first one. All that land that Jefferson had bought, Missouri wants to come into the Union, and the issue is, okay, do they come in a slave state or a free state? And guys, morality has nothing to do with anything here. If Missouri comes in a slave state, then 3/5 of those slaves will be kind of representation in Congress. The North doesn't want that, okay? This is an example of the political aspect of it. And guys, you can't separate it. It's got to be in there, okay? Okay. And of course, guys, you probably don't need to know the specification of this thing. What it does, it sets a precedent for the one-to-one admittance of states. One state comes in slave, one state comes in free, and you maintain the balance in the Senate when you do that. Okay? So that's the first thing. This is going to be, okay, I'm sorry. That one is going to be the biggest issue. That slave border. Cutting that 3630 line across the United States and blatantly saying slavery is allowed everywhere under it, it's not allowed everywhere over it. And if you remember the maps we showed you in class, remember how there's very little under 3630? And there's a whole lot over 3630. Okay? So what the Missouri Compromise does for the first time, I can put it twice, okay? That's the biggie. Okay? That is the importance of it. It starts to regard slavery in the admission of states. If a territory wants to come into the Union, they abide by the Northwest Ordinance to come in and everything. Now, for the first time, slavery is an issue. You can't just roll into the Union. You've got to say, okay, if I roll into the Union as a free state, that means somebody's got to add a slave state. We've got to keep the Senate balanced. Okay? So from this point onward, no state will enter the Union without a consideration for slavery. Is everybody good so far? Okay? Yeah. You may see this. This pops up every now and then. They'll play his quote. When he's talking about the fire bell in the night, Jefferson is saying, I knew it. I knew it was going to happen. That when we were back in Philadelphia, we should have done something about it then, but we couldn't because we would have lost the South. We wouldn't have a union. And we knew sooner or later that slavery was going to raise its ugly head and bite us. Okay? So he said when he heard about the Missouri Compromise, it awoke him like a fire bell in the night, like a fire alarm. Okay? And that was pretty much, it was almost a confession by him that we knew we had missed an opportunity back in Philadelphia. But the fact of the matter is, our hands were tied. Okay? Remember we talked about the founding fathers of Philadelphia, okay? They know they've got a problem with slavery. If they didn't know it, they wouldn't have had to do the 3/5 compromise and things like this. They know they got a problem. So you've got an opportunity to solve their problem. Here's what the problem is. It goes back to factions. If you eliminate slavery at the Constitutional Convention, you lose the South. The South will form their own government. And we're very vocal about this, okay? So the only thing the founders could do is either have two nations, okay, or have one nation and accept slavery, which is what they did. Knowing, of course, that one day it was going to come back to bite them in the butt. And that's what happened in 1820. Okay. 1850, this is after the Mexican Cession. And again, this is about admission, but this time it's a larger aspect of the spread of slavery because you're not talking about one state here. You're talking about the entire southwest 1/4 of the United States. We had just won the Mexican War, which was a controversial war to begin with. Okay? It was claimed to be our first war of imperialism, our first war. It was the first war we fought not to defend ourselves. We're getting territory. It was the Manifest Destiny War. So now we've got all that land. And the next obvious question is, you got all that land, someone's going to come into the states and everything, free your slave. All right? This is what happens there. Again, these are things like you may need to know it, maybe not. I don't think they'll ask you specifics like this, okay? But the one-to-one trade-off, remember you had a one-to-one trade-off with Missouri and Maine, okay? The number one trade-off here is California and Texas, okay? California's free, Texas slave. That justifies your balance in the Senate, okay? Right. They're going to extend that 3630 line all the way up to California. So now all of a sudden it doesn't stop in Spanish Mexico, okay? It goes to California. Everything above that line, okay, and below that line, it's not going to be the way it was in Missouri. Instead of saying slavery is allowed or not allowed, they're going to say, let the people decide. This is popular sovereignty, okay? And guys, that's a change. That's a marked change over what you had in Missouri, okay? Okay? Don't get fooled with this one. Don't get fooled with it. A lot of people will write that the Compromise of 1850 outlawed slavery in Washington, D.C. It did not. Guys, remember, Washington, D.C. is a southern city. It was put in the South by the Assumption Compromise. Southerners are not going to allow slavery to be abolished anywhere, no matter what the city is. So slavery was not abolished in Washington, D.C. The slave trade was. Okay? And that's including the domestic slave trade. So don't get fooled by that. When I've had the great essays before involving this, and I see that, I give extra points. Okay? Because it's the distinction that's important. Okay, so everybody gets so far. Okay. And the last one is this one, which doesn't seem like much at this point, but it will become later on the Southern Orthodox doctrine. If you just lay that. About to go. Okay. Keep this in mind. As soon as the Mexican War is over with in 1848, and before people even start talking about this compromise, a freshman pops up. His name is David Wilmot from Pennsylvania. And Wilmot says, before we even start talking about this crap, I got the solution right here. Ban it everywhere. Keep slavery out. We do not want slaves in these new territories, okay? That's called the Wilmot Proviso. So the first volley fired in this war is going to be to keep slavery out of here, okay? Listen carefully. The reason people listen to it, guys, it's got to be important because it's a freshman. Nobody listens to freshmen for anything. But the reason they listened to him, he was a free soiler. That's the first time you see these people. When they talk about keeping slavery out of the West, they don't want to compete for jobs, and they don't want to compete for land. And you've seen later on how important the free soilers are, okay? So as soon as this thing is right here, everything, you've got to consider what Democrats want, what Republicans want, and what free soilers want, okay? Always remember this. Lincoln was a free soiler.